What is up, watch fam? I'm Christian, the curator of the Theo and Harris Vintage Watch Shop, and today I'm talking about two of my favorite watches from two of the world's most revered brands, Cartier and Rolex. Brands that understand something that's really exemplified in the two watches we're talking about today, that no other brand has seemed to understand as well and for as long. And no other brand has been able to balance these two ideas that are balanced so well in these two watches. And the two watches I'm talking about today are the Datejust and the Santos to Cartier. So, as always, before I get into some of these larger, more, thematic modern thoughts, I want to go back into history to give you a little bit of context. Back in 1904, Louis Cartier designed a watch for his friend and famous pilot, Brazilian pilot and socialite Albert Santos Dumont. He made this watch. I was actually very proud of how well I pronounced that. It was kind of French. He made this watch for him that he dreamed up in his own mind. Louis Cartier, even more than a watchmaker, was really just a designer, right? I don't say just a designer as if to say that's below, right? But that's really what Cartier has always been. Cartier has been a genius in the world of design, or at least was at one point, not as much anymore, but was certainly at one point. Cartier was a brand that truly understood how to create something that was new and fresh and interesting and inspired from the world. In 1904, he designed this piece, the Santos Dumont. Now, I've said before on this channel that I think that the Santos Dumont was the first, watch that communicated the same kind of concept and idea that ultimately was communicated much later in the 1970s by Gerald Genta. Slightly different, but very similar. It was this idea of balancing elegance with industrial design, right? Making something that was sporty and tough while also gentlemanly and elegant. This was a, novel idea in the 1970s. And it's funny that I think it was really introduced back in 1904. Now, Cartier at the time, and for many, many, many decades to come, was not a manufacturer that produced watches at great scale. There were many years where Cartier was producing 5, 7 tanks. Cartier watches were handmade and made at very small batches and quantities for very, very discerning clients. That is a big part of the reason, moving the conversation into a conversation about investability and analyzing investment value and upward mobility in watches. These watches are so rare that it doesn't take that many interested buyers to change the market value drastically, right? You only need, 20 interested people with a couple of $1,000s, relatively speaking, at the time in the early 2000s when these watches were still a couple of $1,000s, to drive up these prices 10, 20, 30-fold, which is exactly what's happened, right? You rewind back to when I got into the vintage watch world, and Cartier tanks, great Cartier tanks from the 60s and 70s were, $4,000, even less. Many times significantly less. Now those same watches are, $20,000, $25,000. And trays have gone up to $70,000 in the large, $100,000. It's crazy, really, what's happened. And not so long ago, they were anywhere from, $1,500 to $4,000. It's amazing what's happened, but that's because not only of the brand reputation, but because of the very, very, very limited quantities. It's kind of this balancing act, but it's not the point of today's conversation. I just wanted to be a little bit tangential and educational for a second. So back to it. The Santos Dumont was the first time that a brand had demonstrated this philosophy of design, that we should produce something that is both industrial and elegant, right? Something that kind of appeals to both sides of man, the duality of man. Cartier replicated that again a couple of years later with their first tank, the Tank Normal, which I've called, a reaction to war, in the same way that much of our American music history is a reaction to war, like the songs from Vietnam. We don't look at Cartier as a similar kind of idea and coming from a similar place, a similar stimulus, but it is. It's another artistic reaction and expression from a particular stimulus. Kind of interesting when you look at it that way. It makes the Cartier tank, the original Cartier tank, the Tank Normal, more kind of mysterious, and I think it gives its meaning a lot of depth and intrigue. When I realized that a couple of years ago, and I always knew it, but I never really clicked and I never understood it. You can know something and understand it, And when it clicked for me, and I was already a Cartier tank fan, I said, oh, geez, that just deepened my relationship with this watch tenfold, my appreciation for the watch tenfold. So they did it again. Okay, fine. Now, fast forward all these years, decades and decades, these watches, of course, because of their size, if we don't look at them in a historical context, we don't look at them in the context of the era they were manufactured, they don't come off as industrial. They come off as just elegant. Right? Modern sensibilities, modern tastes. Again, without that historical context, you don't understand that these watches were, for their time, balancing industrial design kind of masculinity, brutality with elegance. And these early Cartiers, these Santos watches specifically, are so hard to find because they manufactured, like as I mentioned, so few. We're talking about, literally small handfuls of watches. A colleague recently found one because it's not a matter of buying, it's a matter of finding. Good luck finding one. And he found one of these watches, and not only are they incredibly expensive, but the upward mobility on a watch like that is just God knows what. God knows what that watch will be worth when he hands it down to his kids because he says he's not selling it, right? But more than that, to those who know, people who understand the watch community, they know that is just, that is, grail. That's like having a Picasso on your wrist. Everyone in the watch community would see something like that and say, oh my God. You can't underestimate the classics, and this gets proven out in the bigger collectible markets. Think about a legend like Basquiat and understanding his place in the market. Not only is his New York City artwork absolutely iconic, but he's also sold a painting for $110 million in 2017, one of the most expensive ever. Now, I bring up Basquiat specifically because he just sold another multi-million-dollar painting. But this one did not benefit a billionaire collector. This one benefited investors, regular people like you and me. And it wasn't just my viewers, but rather the members of the Masterworks investing platform, a lifelong sponsor, actually, of the Theo and Harris channel that's distributed back over $60 million in total net proceeds to investors for their 23 exits so far. Masterworks breaks blue chip contemporary art down into shares, democratizing these highly investable art pieces so that we all can ride the wave of their wild appreciation, which has been proven for decades. Just over 3 years ago, Masterworks offered this Basquiat painting to investors for $5.7 million, and they recently sold for $8 million. So get this, investors who put in just $10K into that initial offering walked away with a profit of over $2,600 after fees. That is profit. So if you want to join our other subscribers in checking out Masterworks, use the link down in our description and get priority access to new Masterworks offerings. Go and take a look now. Back into the episode. But in 1945, Rolex, Hans Wilsdorf, did a very similar maneuver. Right? Balanced, not industrial design per se, but a bit of brutality, a bit of substance, a bit of size, a bit of weight with fantastic elegance. So, achieved the Datejust in 1945 for an anniversary celebration in a slightly different manner than Louis Cartier did it back in 1904 and continued to do it later on. But ultimately, the same balance, the same concept, the same approach was taken. Slightly different road, but same approach. And that's why the Datejust has been able to remain so unchanged all these years later, unlike the Santos. The Santos today has its original design language, of course, like Porsche's 911. You can see the lineage, certainly, but the modern, executions are not just in technology, but in design and execution, in proportionality, in so many things, in sizing and proportionality, so many, ways, wildly different. These are very different watches, the Santos of today and the Santos of 1904, yesteryear. The Datejust is not so different because the Datejust took a slightly more conservative approach. It wasn't as elegant as what Cartier was doing back in 1904. It wasn't as aggressive as they were doing either. It took the same approach of balance, but closer to the middle. Not extreme on either side, but same winning formula. The Datejust is a watch that is kind of comfortable, kind of heavy, kind of bulky, relatively speaking, to other dress watches. But so far as sports watches are concerned, so far as watches that are supposed to be, bulky and industrial and all these things, still pretty elegant, still pretty small. The bracelets are sort of thin. The links and sides are polished. The bezels even had a couple of different variations that could turn it one way or the other on levels of formality. White gold fluted, if you wanted to push that watch, which could be a bit of a shapeshifter, into a more elegant piece. Go with an engine turn bezel, making it a bit more sporty, going smooth even to keep it somewhere in the middle, right? The Datejust and the Cartier Santos understood that. They understood what Gerald Genta understood back in 1972 with Audemars Piguet's Royal Oak and 76 with Patek Philippe's Nautilus, that the balance of, you know, of industrial design, of masculinity, of heft, right, of brutality, even particularly the Royal Oak, and elegance, proportion, comfortability, wearability, that is the ultimate balance. That is the ultimate approach to watch design. Now, of course, that doesn't mean the Datejust or the Cartier Santos are the most beautiful or best watches ever manufactured. No, not at all. Cartier's Crash, I think, is, you know, wilder, more surreal, of course, bizarre, maybe more beautiful to some than the Santos. I probably even agree. And it's nowhere nearly as versatile. It does not balance industrial design, does not balance masculinity and elegance. It balances absurdity and elegance, absurdity with conformity, right? It's a different balance there, right? But these watches, these two models, the Santos, and I'm wearing one right now, which is what kind of gave me the idea for this episode. These two watches, the Santos and the Datejust, took the same approach to watch design that could appeal to the masses. It was a formula that everyone, or just about everyone, could look at and say, that fits in my life. And regardless of their production numbers, Cartier being very small and Rolex being very large, Cartier now in modernity catching up and being a mass producer of wristwatches, of course. But it was, you know, almost immaterial. The point was that the approach behind both watches was to be widely loved because of their balance. You know, and I think that it's brilliant. And I think that people everywhere can look at a Santos and say, it's great. It's a great watch. I love it in the medium size. I love it in the large. I love it in two-tone. I love it in steel. It's great. Same thing with the Datejust. I love it in green. I love it in blue. I love it with this motif. I love it with that motif. It's fine. All well and good. But these are luxury items. It's a heck of a lot of money for the time. No doubt about that. Ought we not understand them better? Ought we not have a deeper relationship with the significance, the kind of logic, the approach behind the watch? That's my contention. That's how I feel about everything. That's how I feel about everything that I look at and consume, right? From, I don't know, Killam pillowcases to cars or to whatever. It doesn't matter. And everything I look at and consume, I want to have a deeper understanding of, right? That's why I hate, kind of like generic, cheap, kind of poorly designed or quickly designed art prints. Not bad always, right? I love. I bought a print of Santiago Bernabeu, right? The stadium that Real Madrid plays in, but relatively speaking, cheap print off of some website a couple of weeks ago. But it was cool. It was designed well. Not everything has to be like a work of great art. That's not the point either. But we want to have a deeper understanding of certain things. We want to understand the significance behind them. We want to, make them be as good, if not better, than the money we paid for them. We want to have our relationship with them be even more rewarding, right, than if we were to have just, bought it because it says Rolex on it, or bought it because it says Cartier on it, or bought it because it has a perceived value and whatever, right, that's going to give us clout. I don't know. I just think that with all the money we've probably all collectively spent on education, I think it would be a real sin, a bad testament to our levels of interest and intrigue and ability to, think, if we just bought a Cartier Santos because, it's cool. We should be able to, or should be interested in what makes it so brilliant, I guess. Anyway, thank you for following the Theo and Harris channel. Subscribe to The Zero for more conversations like this, conversations that are, far more, unfiltered. If you think I'm unfiltered here, you should see me over there. And we'll talk. Go over to the Theo and Harris shop and shop straps and watches. We're listing more every week now. Big change coming at the company.